You're welcome back to Morning Express. Now let's have Mr. Seun Oni join us virtually. Mr. Seun Oni is the editor-in-chief at the Daily Courier, a regular on the program, a friend of the station, and I believe a patriotic Nigerian who loves to lend his deep wealth of knowledge into matters of national concern. A very good morning to you, Mr. Seun. Thank you so much for joining us again this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show again. Always a delight to be here.
Absolutely, sir. Well, let's kick off with the oil and gas sector. Yesterday, we saw NUPENG blowing hot and stating that it is embarking on a nationwide strike over its brawl with Dangote refinery. Now, this is while the federal government swayed in swiftly to intervene and ensure that the strike does not, take place. However, we saw that the meeting ended in a deadlock yesterday. What exactly are your thoughts? And I believe there was some sort of reportage on your paper as well with regards to this.
Well, industrial issues have become a major, what I would call a teething problem in the way we manage economic issues as well. Sadly, my background in economics also tells me that what most trade union organizations in this part of the world should use as the last resort often is a pull from the beginning of their negotiations with private sector players, state government, and on the other extreme, the federal government, which is unfortunate. When the news of the strike by NUPENG and um, Petron, the other organization, came in. Uh, that was later last week. From Thursday, Fridays, we began to receive some of those strike notices. A number of issues were raised, and I think a major part of it was largely Dangote refineries embargo on unionizing drivers of the trucks. Other issues were related to the CNG trucks that were to be deployed by the refinery, which, in their opinion, the opinion of NUPENG and the other Trailer Drivers Association, would send some of their staff out of the labor market. Of course, we saw that the petrol dealers associations, who are more like the middlemen in this whole issue, also threw their weight behind NUPENG and the other striking drivers. From the negotiations yesterday, it was a deadlock, but there was also a win for NUPENG from the report we got from the meeting. The win for NUPENG is that Dangote refineries had carved in and conceded that its drivers can actually unionize. And I think that's a win for NUPENG. But on the other issues that were on the front burner, how Dangote's introduction of CNG trucks would impact on the other players, the middlemen and the drivers themselves, that is still a hotly debated issue. But unfortunately, I think NUPENG and the other drivers will just need to go back and have a rethink on how they will still stay relevant, because the real dynamics that people have actually been talking about, and I expect that in the next 10 years is something we will see, is that eventually the growing interconnectivity of our rail system would get to a point where all the major refineries, like the Dangote refinery, the refinery in Port Harcourt, the one in Delta and Kaduna, would be linked to the rail somehow, and we begin to have haulage trains that would ship some of these products and ferry them to their destination.
Well,
Ultimately,
well,
that
well, well,
is
Miss
where.
Mr. Sharon, I just I will have to cut you there. There was a comment you made earlier that Dangote Refinery has now agreed to allow its drivers join some of these unions. Yesterday during the meeting, the reports that we got was that the representative of the Dangote Refinery staged a walkout from the meeting. At what point was this resolution made? For Dangote to allow its workers to join unions like NUPENG.
Okay, those were like I mentioned, there were a number of issues on the table to be discussed. And I think in a negotiation of that nature, you would definitely have to start from the comfortable to the not so comfortable. Because the most uncomfortable part of the discourse from the information available to the public is, of course, the huge investment that the refinery has actually made in the CNG trucks, which, of course, did not go well with those who had been in the industry before. In their opinion, it will mean Dangote will have a hold of his transportation arrangement, which before now used to be in the hands of third parties. And I think that's actually the economic side of the whole conversation. It's going to be, for instance, um, a huge loss in the opinion of NUPENG and the other petrol dealers who in most cases would have their own, not just their petrol station, we also have access by their own fleet of trucks to convey some of these things. So I struggle now to get the name of the man who actually said that yesterday. That in course of their conversation, that was an area that Dangote actually considered that if unionizing is an issue, they have no issue about that. They can allow their drivers to unionize. But the thorny issue, of course, I know there is no way the investment have been made. In fact, a part of the trucks have actually been delivered. So I don't see any going back about that. And that's exactly what I was trying to tie it to, that he brought in CNG trucks, but the future is that we will have haulage trains that will ferry some of these things. That will even mean that some of the CNG trucks might not be useful in maybe a decade or two from now, because what maybe 10, like what we saw in transportation, the largest bus that we have available now, maybe we take 60, 68, 70 people in a single trip. But if with rail transportation, you can have 1,000 or more people in just a single transit of train transportation. So
Well,
what?
while you are advocating for a haulage system via train or via rail, if you remember, we had a conversation here on the program, or a discussion here on the program a couple of weeks ago, when there was a trail derailment, along the Abuja Kaduna, way. Some of these issues that we talked about then was the vandalism of the rail lines. Is this an issue that might also come up when, or if eventually refineries or companies like Dangote Refinery decide to adopt this method of haulage via rail?
Certainly it's going to be an issue. But what the event in the few weeks ago had also taught us as a nation is that we must value surveillance. And I think that's where we are missing it. I came a bit very hard on the MD of the NRC when that incident occurred, because just A fortnight before that unfortunate accident from Abuja to Kaduna occurred, the editorial of Daily Courier, which of course for that week, I was actually the one who penned that editorial because I had a most inconveniencing trip from Kaduna to Abuja. I was in Kaduna for a leadership meeting, and my two-way transportation, of course, was by train. And one thing that was noticeable, even though I paid for an executive transportation, it was so inconveniencing. It was noise from our point of um, our taking off point at the Kubwa terminal to Rigasa in Kaduna. We were hearing all forms of noise. It was very inconveniencing. Secondly, the train was traveling very slowly, and we began to ask questions, and we were told that maybe it was in part to some of the, so some of the things that led to this accident eventually have been noticeable for many weeks. And I actually wrote in that editorial that they need to take their surveillance seriously. And personally, I copied the MD of NRC. There was no response. 2 weeks later, we had that derailment. So a lot of lessons need to be learned, because when we are doing haulage, like you pointed out, the accident will be much more devastating than what you have with just human transportation.
Well, this meeting has held, and of course, while being met with a deadlock, what exactly is the resolution now? Is NUPENG still continuing with the strike? Are they calling it off? Dangote has conceded and said that it will allow its drivers join the unions. What are Nigerians expecting in the next couple of days?
I have actually been on the lookout to see what Dangote refineries will actually say, because they have a very active and proactive media team. But up till this morning, I've really not seen any official position from Dangote. So what that means in part might actually also tell us that Dangote refineries would still come to Georgia. But for NUPENG, from the report also we got, they have not called off their strike. But the beautiful thing is that the impact of the strike had not been so biting as it used to be. Maybe that would be because a whole lot of people got the notice early, and we have fuel in a number of stations. The problem will be if the strike continues, how far reaching will the impact be? But as I speak to you today, we've not seen any major negative impact of the strike. But Dangote not putting out a statement might mean that they will still listen to the voice of reason, go back to the negotiation table, and have a decent dialogue with the union. And we are hoping that eventually both parties will come out with some patriotic zeal to whatsoever they say there, so that we don't throw our economy backwards by the actions of either of the parties.
Now, Mr. Sherman, before we move on to yet another concern of strike, this time around by the TUC, one of the main bones of contention within this discourse is the legality of the decision by Dangote Refinery earlier to ban its drivers from joining this unions. How legal is this? And under the ambits of the law, is the refinery allowed to do that?
I think the legal issues have been thoroughly dealt with by lawyers, and even the government was very clear about that. no private organization has the right to foist on a staff not to unionize. You saw the banking sectors were notorious for doing that for many decades until trade union organizations stood their grounds and actually fight it out. In fact, it was a legal tussle. Eventually, they won at the court because the law is always on the side of staff of organizations to have that right to unionize if they choose to. So on the legal issue, I think there is no controversy about that. It is illegal for any organization to insist that its staff cannot be a part of a legally recognized association. So the right to association is enshrined as a constitutional right in our constitution.
Well, Mr. Sheon, let's move on to the Trade Union Congress that is threatening a nationwide strike if the federal government goes ahead with a 5% tax on diesel and petrol in the country. Now, mind you, NUPENG is already on a strike backed by Petron and other sister agencies or sister unions, with the TUC also, threatening this strike or this industrial action. What does this mean for Nigerians? It appears that there is a wave of strikes. There is something in the air with regards to these unions.
I think it's unfortunate when I saw the release by TUC of threatening the federal government that it might actually go on strike if the 5% task on the fuel is actually not reversed. Unfortunate because a labor organization like TUC should have its research arm and not come and threaten the entire nation with strike based on rumors and conjectures. It is unfortunate because the 5% tax is actually not novel the way they made it look like. It's not new. It did not come with the passage of the new tax bills or the act that we have now. It did not come with it. It's always been there. And it only comes to life when the executive, of course, that will be done by the Minister of Finance, looking at the situation and ensuring that it is just the right time to do. It will now be promulgated, of course, from the more like an executive order that will now make it have the force of law. So what the new tax act actually had done, like several other taxes, is to bring taxes that are scattered and littered everywhere, because that was a major concern for our ease of doing business in Nigeria, where you have multiplicity of taxes, littered across National Assembly promulgations, State Assembly promulgations, and sometimes the local government legislatures that even people don't hear nothing about. They make their own tax laws, and so you see guys putting on vests and harassing people across different parts of the country. Unfortunately, even the FCT, that is supposed to be a bastion of legality, you have seen this happening, and it just seems the authorities are playing deaf ear to it. Of course, we are aware how just last week or the upper week, a family lost their lives due to activities of this type of people on our roads. So what the new tax law had done is to harmonize these laws and bring them into one net. But that condition that it can only go into effect when the executive thinks that the climate is ripe for it is still the same condition in the new tax law. So it doesn't mean that when the tax law comes to effect in January, the 5% is coming into effect in January. I think it's so clear. But somehow,
Mr. Shawn, the average Nigerian might not quite understand the technicalities of the new tax law, might not really have the knowledge of what the law or what the tax law is supposed to do, or what the tax law or how the tax law is supposed to help him or her. Now, in this situation, what I believe the average Nigerian's notion or perception of this situation is, subsidy has been removed on petroleum products, and now the government is still trying to tax Nigerians on an already expensive commodity. It is as simple as that. What is your thoughts?
I think it is not even as simple as that. Let me be very honest with you.
Okay.
Before now, what we have is that we have subsidy to help the poorest. But over the years, we discovered that the subsidies were not going to the poorest. Rather, the finances that should come to the pocket of the government will now go to the pocket of a few people. So the nation is losing in two ways. The resources that should come to the government is not coming to the government, and the infrastructures and the other services that should go to the citizens are not going to the citizens, because ab initio the resources are not in a government coffer. So that was actually the basis for the clamor for the removal of fuel subsidy. But what I'm saying is that even while fuel subsidy was being paid actively, and we don't have sufficient money in our coffers, there was a law in our books that says that 5% of taxes on, fuel consumption should be used for the development of our road infrastructure. But this law will come to effect when the government feels that the economic climate accommodates it. The tax reform that we have, that is now an act of parliament.
So there's no certain or confirmed time frame for this. It is at the discretion of the federal government when it deems fit, when it feels like the economic atmosphere is soft enough to roll out this tax law, the 5% taxation on petroleum products.
Thank you. The tax reform is coming into effect in January as an act of parliament. But the 5% is clearly written, even before they harmonized it. It will only be activated at the discretion of the executive when the economic climate is ripe for it. So that the tax reform that is now an act of parliament is coming into effect in January does not mean that the 5% is coming. The 5% tax on petroleum product is coming to effect in January. It comes to effect when the executive thinks that the climate is now ripe for it to be activated. And nobody had actually said it's coming to effect in January. But somehow, I don't know how people read it, and they said, oh, apart from, because the reason why labor union had actually not attacked the tax reform bill is because for the first time, the new act of parliament that we call the tax act now, all right, for the first time, we are having what we call a progressive tax system. Before now, what we used to have is a regressive tax system, where especially government workers, salary earners who pay what we call payee, actually pay more from what they earn than the rich millionaires and billionaires we have in the country. So our tax system, to put it in layman's term, used to be punitive. The rich pay less, while the poor pay more. But what we have now is that there is a level of salary you earn that the new tax act says you are not going to pay tax. All right. So for the first time, we have a progressive tax system in the country. But the brouhaha is on the 5% fuel tax. That what had happened, the conversation, the narrative, which I think TUC bought into, is that the government removed fuel subsidy on one hand, and they are introducing it as 5%, and this 5% will jack up the cost of transportation. So the tax you are not paying, they are collecting it in form of 5% on the other hand.
Now,
But the truth,
in order to add to your comment about what the TUC is, riding on the back of, it says that the policy itself. Now, this is the TUC speaking. That the policy is an economic wickedness against already overburdened citizens who are battling soaring fuel prices, food inflation, and a weakening naira. These are the comments of the TUC. Now, with regards to the last point, which is the weakening naira, we also got reports that the naira has been really doing well in the last couple of days. I think as of today, it's at 1,508 naira to a dollar. So that's some sort of progress in that regard.
you remember my opening statement when you raised this issue of TUC. It's unfortunate a labor union like that. I know the NLC, for instance, used to have a research arm. I don't know about TUC, but I think before they put in this type of scary, um, you know, more like a doomsday publications, they need to do a bit of research, because it's unfortunate. They are a very highly respected labor house, and anything coming from them, the public takes it as a sacred truth. But in this case, I think they fell short of it. They should have done a bit of research so that they know that that 5% petroleum tax law will not be activated in January, and the federal government at no point said or say that it will be activated. And so I think that is not fair enough.
Well, Mr. Sharon, let's move on to yet another matter in the news. We have about 10 minutes to wrap up the conversation. This time around, it's from the National Assembly. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, Right Honorable Tajudeen Abbas, has condemned in strong terms what he described as reckless borrowing, while raising an alarm of Nigeria being in debt of about 149 trillion naira. Now, from an economic point of view, how bad is this?
From an economic point of view, is very bad, very bad. Um, because our earning as a country, despite the fact that we are celebrating appreciable increase and improvement in our trade receipt, we are still far, far, far from where we should be. Bear in mind our population. A nation of over 200 million people, we are in the same category, the same bracket population-wise with a nation as Brazil. But their earning is almost 20% of our earnings. Let me just put it that way. That means what they use in taking care of their population is about 20 times what we use in taking care of our population. But when it comes to the debt side, we found ourselves in a position where at some point we were spending as high as 90.2% of our earning on debt servicing. The only way we sustained our economy was now to borrow more to service more debt. And so when it became practically impossible for us to sustain that, we started printing currency, which now turned our economy, to now start going south. And so when this administration came in, we thought we were having a reprieve because our earnings were now improving. Of course, in part to the removal of the fuel subsidy and the harmonization of the exchange rate that we had at the time. But one thing that we have not yet gotten right is that while we are working on pegging our foreign exchange and also ensuring that we are wrapping up our earnings, especially from the non-oil earnings, we are also unnecessarily ramping up our debt. And that is concerning. Sadly, when the handlers of our economy want to talk, they are always comfortable discussing what we owe based on dollar terms. They shy away from discussing what we owe in naira terms. Because
And
when
why
they
why
talk
do you
about
think that is so, Mr. Shononi?
it's easy because when you discuss it in dollar term, it gives a sense that you have not borrowed so much. But when you discuss it in naira term, then the picture is very clear. So for instance, the borrowing of the immediate past administration, when you compare it with the borrowing of the current administration in dollar term, it suggests to you that the past administration within 2 years borrowed far less compared to the current administration. But when you flip it and you discuss it in naira term, then the disparity is very clear. Because what happens was that the past administration was borrowing at a dollar, to naira of about in the region of, let's say, 400 and something naira. But now we now have a dollar to naira, despite the improvement we have seen from what you said this morning, is at 1,500 and something naira. So it now becomes very obvious that we are still doing badly in the way and manner we manage our debt to GDP. And every
One of the
time,
things that the speaker, one of the concerns that he raised was that some of these loans, are being driven by consumption and corruption, and that they must be rejected. Now, this is also as the federal government is set to borrow about $500 million from the World Bank. The National Assembly cannot outrightly stop the federal government, the executive, of course, from borrowing some of these funds, much like the one they want to take from the World Bank now. But how do we shift from consumption driven borrowing to production driven borrowing that would help stabilize our economy?
unfortunately, I think the speaker is just being smart by half. The right place to wade the big stick is not in the type of fora where he's making that. He just wants to sensationalize a very important aspect of our economic health, if I should put it so succinctly. He's the Speaker of the Green Chamber. And I'm aware that there are certain types of borrowing that we have to go through both chambers. He has what it takes. He's in the same political party with the party in running the executive in the central government. So if the House of Rep, for instance, insists that they will not, pass or support some of these loans, of course, it will not pass. That's how government works. The executive has that check and balance to the executive when it comes to issue of borrowing. So I think rather than coming to make, sensationalize an issue as our debt, it should go back and ensure that the oversight responsibility, constitutionally assigned job of oversight, is done properly. because what he had actually said is the reality.
Hello, Mr. Sean. Mr. Sean, are you with us? Well, before we have Mr. Sean react to this particular matter, before we let him go, let's take a look at the Daily Courier one more time. Remember that Mr. Sean is the editor-in-chief of the Daily Courier. Now let's have that paper on the screen. On the front page of the Daily Courier this morning, Reps Speaker raises dust over Nigeria's 149 trillion naira debt. Clarifies I never condemned borrowing, only reckless debt. Warns debt to GDP ratio has reached legal ceiling. Nigeria's debt sustainability in question, experts say. And this is the reportage on the Speaker's comments yesterday on the front page of the Daily Courier. Now let's have Mr. Sean. Let's see if we can have him back with us virtually to conclude on this discussion.
Can you
Well,
hear
it
me
appears
now?
Mr. Sean is not back. Let's take a look at a few more papers. Hello, Mr. Sean. Are you back with us on the line?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can hear you loud and clear. Please, your concluding thoughts on this matter before we let you go, sir.
Oh, thank you so much, sir. I was trying to say that the consumption driven loan that we have now, because most time when we talk about these loans, we also often forget that is a national loan. That means the aggregation of the federal government component and the state government component. And so most times when these loans come into the country, um, people, instead of using this loan for infrastructures, you know, capital projects that will better the life and lot of citizenry, what we have seen over the years is that these loans are cornered to welfareist inclined projects. And the whole essence of cornering these loans into welfareist inclined project is so that they can steal some of these loans and divert them into private purse. We have seen instances where health related interventions, sometimes you will hear such thing as um, social safety programs, and you can't assemble up to 1,000 people in a state that are actually benefiting from these social safety programs. I'm not saying the federal government are not guilty of this, but I'm also saying, since we are talking about the national budget, the national debt, we must also put our searchlight on the state government. And that's where the civil society actors have a major role to play. We have to call on them. This attention, more like a fixation on Abuja, we must find a way of state
All
level.
right, Mr. Shononi, quite very strong points you have laid out here and timely calls as well. We must thank you so much. This has been a very interesting discuss with you here on Morning Express.
Thank you so much for having me, and have a good day.
All right, thank you. Well, that has been Mr. Shononi, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Courier, speaking to us on matters of national interest. We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll still visit the front pages of newspaper publications across the country and have the conversations around them or discussions around them in earnest. Stay with us.